far-right Brazilian government of Jair Bolsonaro has eliminated housing programs for the low-income population in a country with a deficit of 6 million homes. The top diplomats of the United States and Russia met in Sweden on Thursday amid rising tensions between the two powers over the military escalation in eastern Ukraine. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa warned against the risk of health apartheid on Thursday as he condemned the travel bans imposed on his country after it detected the new Omicron variant of COVID-19. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Brazil, a country experiencing a deficit of 6 million homes. In this context, the government of Jair Bolsonaro has eliminated housing programs for the low-income population. From Sao Paulo, our correspondent Ignacio Limas brings us more details.
Fourth highest unemployment rate in the world. The average wage reached the lowest level in 5 years, and inflation leading fuel, food, rents and utilities to records high.
700 between rents, electricity and water. My salary is 1,400 and I receive it every 45 days. It's not enough to survive with 3 children.
Only 26% of children get free meals a day. Less than half of the Brazilian population eats properly.
It is not enough to pay the rent, buy food, meat, gas containers, school, supplies, etc.
Despite the Supreme Court prohibited evictions during the pandemic, real estate interests remain in other judicial and political institutions.
When the rent cannot be paid, what happens is eviction and homelessness. If the rent, water and electricity are combined, how does the person survive?
In the face of an increase in homelessness, occupations are growing, such as the Luisa Mahin, where almost 200 homeless workers' movement families have reached 4 months of resistance in the midst of the pandemic.
We're not so well because we sleep in canvas tents. Sometimes we wake up at dawn in the rain, but we keep going.
The government of Jair Bolsonaro eliminated the Minha Casa, Minha Vida, a housing program that during the government of Dilma Rousseff promised 3 million low-income housing units. It was replaced by the Casa Verde Amarela program.
It's just a facade they put up. The Casa Verde Amarela is supposed to help people, but it doesn't help at all because the fee income is absurd.
The program focuses on the middle class and does not include the most vulnerable sectors of the population, who make up 70% of the housing deficit.
The Casa Verde Amarela program is a scam of Bolsonaro's. It is for those who have money. It does not work. Everyone knows that the program he invented is for those who earn more than 3 minimum wages.
According to the Building and Woodworkers International, the government of Jair Bolsonaro reduced investment in housing programs from $2.2 billion to less than $5 million. The reduction affected several sectors of the economy.
It has an impact on revenues, on the social security system, and above all, on employment. This year alone, 350,000 jobs were lost in the civil construction sector and other related sectors.
In 2020, the housing deficit in Sao Paulo exceeded 1 million homes.
Ignacio Lemos y Julia Nassif para teleSUR.
Former Colombian Senator Piedad Córdoba presented her second report to the transitional justice system on the political persecution of opposition forces. During her appearance, the social activist made proposals to the Commission for Truth, Coexistence and Non-Repetition so that the rights of opposition figures and human rights activists are guaranteed. Piedad Córdoba pointed out that political opposition in Colombia is a high-risk activity since sectors of the state persecute, stigmatize, threaten, attack and assassinate leaders who oppose their proposals. The activist emphasized that the Truth Commission is undertaking fundamental work for reparations and the reconstruction of the state, and for this reason she requested the opening of intelligence files to determine the crimes committed in the context of the conflict and beyond.
This is a very important hearing. I come to tell the truth about the persecution of all the political opposition in Colombia, and I'm going to expose in a very detailed way my case. I do not come here to ask for forgiveness or mercy or to ask for anything. I come to demand democracy. I come to demand reparation. I come very well documented with a lot of military intelligence data, and above all, I come to unravel what has been this persecution, this harassment, these judicial setups, and I believe that this will be very important for the country.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro called on the new regional and local authorities elected on November 21st to listen to the population and act with total respect for their demands. The president insisted on the urgency of breaking with the archetypes of liberal democracy during the inauguration ceremony of the newly elected governor of the state of Aragua in the north-central part of the country. Maduro stressed that as soon as he learned of the electoral results, he was enthusiastic about the idea of consolidating a federal council regardless of political trends. Meanwhile, the newly elected governor committed himself to the implementation of a concrete agenda to address the needs of his state. Maduro called on all levels of government to build a new system with the people who can provide the clearest answers to pressing needs.
We need to build a new system of government. I will insist on that 1,000 times. A new system of government that breaks the model of representative bourgeois democracy. With the people, everything. Without the people, we are nothing. With the people, everything. The people are capable. The people know what fails and why it fails. I know the people know the problems that exist and why they exist. And sometimes we put a wall between the popular claim, the popular demand, the popular criticism, and ourselves. If something I can tell you in 9 years is that in 9 years I have never doubted the concept of popular power. I have never doubted the strength of the people's power. I have always trusted the people in the worst circumstances that I have had to live. I have always trusted the people in their capacity of resistance, in their capacity of reflection, in their capacity of patience, and we must always trust the people.
The Venezuelan president also criticized those government officials, leaders and politicians who have closed themselves up in their offices rather than interacting with the people in order to overcome the obstacles posed by the U.S. blockade and sanctions.
It is true the perverse criminal effects of the blockade. It is true, but just as it is true, it is also true that some leaders with concrete responsibilities as governors, mayors, ministers, have been victims of another blockade which is even worse, the mental blockade, and they have distanced themselves from the people. They have stopped listening to the people. They have confined themselves in their offices, and when the elections came, they go out to look for votes. The blockade of the heart and mind, the indifference, the incompetence, the corruption, the inefficiency is worse than the U.S. blockade.
And we'll be right back after this very short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The top diplomats of the United States and Russia, Antony Blinken and Sergei Lavrov, met in Sweden on Thursday amid rising tensions between the two powers over the military escalation in eastern Ukraine. According to a State Department official quoted by U.S. media, Blinken will also be meeting with the Ukrainian Foreign Minister on the sidelines of the Ministerial Council of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. The exchange between the U.S. and Russian diplomats came amid a new surge of complaints from Washington that centers on Russia's alleged gathering of troops on its border with Ukraine, while Moscow denounces the West for its military encirclement of the country using NATO troops. And Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warned of a nightmare scenario of military confrontation in Europe as tensions rise over Ukraine. Speaking as part of the ministerial meeting of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, hosted by Sweden, Lavrov insisted on the threat to geopolitical stability posed by NATO troops close to the Russian borders.
U.S. medium-range missiles are about to appear in Europe. The nightmare scenario of military confrontation that our continent experienced after the well-known NATO double solution is returning. Europe remains silent. Ukraine is being pumped up militarily, which fuels Kiev's desire to sabotage the Minsk agreements and fuels the illusion that the conflict can be resolved by force. The strategic stability architecture is rapidly eroding. NATO refuses to consider our proposals to de-escalate tensions and prevent dangerous incidents in a constructive way. On the contrary, the alliance's military infrastructure is irresponsibly moving closer to Russia's borders. Missile defense systems have been deployed in Romania and Poland that can be used as strike systems.
Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken accused Russia of breaching the Minsk agreements and criticized Moscow's alleged troop buildup on the Ukrainian border.
And so we call on Russia to respect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, to de-escalate, reverse the recent troop buildup, return forces to normal, peaceful positions, and to implement the Minsk commitments, especially the ceasefire provisions and those allowing OSCE monitors unfettered access. Diplomacy is...
Russia's Federal Security Service arrested 3 Ukrainian military intelligence agents accused of plotting to carry out terrorist attacks in Russia. All 3 Ukrainian nationals had confessed to being recruited by Ukraine's military and security services, according to the Federal Security Service. The Russian intelligence service said one of those detained had planned to detonate 2 explosive devices at an undisclosed location. The news comes as tensions between the 2 countries escalate over Kiev's accusations of Russian military build-up and planned invasions, at the same time that Ukrainian troops have been deployed in huge numbers to the border area. Several British media outlets have echoed information that reveals efforts by Saudi Arabia's government to prevent investigations conducted by the United Nations into human rights violations committed by the Saudi coalition in Yemen. The information revealed that Riyadh tried to dissuade members of the Human Rights Council from voting in favour of a resolution that would extend investigations on the war crimes against Yemeni people for another 2 years. According to the investigation published by The Guardian, the Arab monarchy threatened Indonesia by asserting it would create obstacles for its officials when travelling to Mecca and offered Togo economic support. It later coincided that, at the time of the vote, Togo announced the opening of a new embassy in Saudi Arabia and received financial support from Riyadh. Both countries voted against the resolution, which was ultimately defeated by 21 votes to 18, with 7 countries abstaining. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs denounced Thursday the ongoing aggressions of the United States against Cuba after fresh sanctions were imposed against the Caribbean island.
The United States has imposed several rounds of unilateral sanctions on Cuban institutions and officials this year, which seriously violate the basic norms of international relations and also bear the consistent bullying and hegemony on the U.S. part. China firmly opposes actions of interfering in other countries' internal affairs and imposing unilateral sanctions under the banners of so-called freedom, democracy, and human rights. We firmly support the efforts of the Cuban government and people to safeguard national sovereignty and social stability. We urge the United States to immediately and completely lift its unilateral sanctions against Cuba in accordance with the principles of the United Nations Charter and basic norms of international relations.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa warned against the risk of health apartheid on Thursday as he condemned the travel bans imposed on his country after it detected the new Omicron variant of COVID-19. On a visit to Ivory Coast, Ramaphosa said the curbs, which many countries have also applied to countries across southern Africa, were regrettable, unfair and unscientific, and warned of the harm they will cause to the travel and tourism industries of the region. The South African president also called for a global guarantee to ensure that vaccines and treatments for COVID-19 are produced at scale and made freely and equitably available to all people. Meanwhile, his host, President Alassane Ouattara, expressed solidarity with South Africa and underlined the effective measures it's taken to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the commitment to help provide vaccines for the African continent. This is the first visit to Ivory Coast, the world's biggest cocoa producer, by a South African president since the two countries established relations in 1992.
Given that it was our own scientists, African scientists, who first detected the Omicron variant, it is also a slap in the face of African excellence and expertise. These bans will cause untold damage, in particular to travel and tourism. that sustain businesses and livelihoods in South Africa and the Southern African region. As South Africa, we stand firmly against any form of health apartheid in the fight against this pandemic.
I applaud the effective measures you have taken to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as your commitment to vaccination, both in terms of its accessibility and its production on the African continent.
According to the World Health Organization, 23 countries across the world have reported cases of the highly mutated Omicron COVID-19 variant. As the situation unfolds, several nations have begun tightening their biosecurity measures. Germany issued new restrictions such as closing bars and other public places as a temporary measure while Parliament determines whether or not to apply mandatory vaccination. The United States imposed strict requirements for entering the country, and the European Union is considering mandatory vaccination as well. According to WHO Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus, it is too soon to know how the new variant will affect transmission, the severity of disease, therapeutics and vaccines. More than 80% of people in Africa have yet to receive a first COVID-19 vaccination dose, the World Health Organization has warned, amid global fears over the new Omicron strain.
Africa has made little inroads in the path to providing vaccine protection. So far, only 102 million Africans in Africa, or 7.5% of the continent population, is fully vaccinated. More than 80% of the population has not received even a single dose. This is dangerously
South
wide.
Africa has accelerated its COVID-19 vaccination campaign by offering jabs at pop-up sites in shopping centres and transport hubs to combat a rapid rise in new cases a week after the discovery of the Omicron variant in the country. Tests indicate the variant is spreading rapidly and is now in 5 of South Africa's 9 provinces. Gauteng province, the country's economic hub, is the hotspot for infections with more than 70% of the new cases. It's not known how many of the new cases are Omicron because scientists can only do full genetic sequencing on a small number of the total positive cases. However, it appears that it is rapidly becoming the dominant variant, according to a statement issued by the National Institute for Communicable Diseases, which said that 74% of the over 200 samples sequenced in November were identified as Omicron.
Is now dominant in Gauteng. And if you can look at the graph at the bottom there, it's showing the percentage of all genomes that were sequenced in the last 3 weeks up to 27th November. You can see there the red, okay, I don't have a pointer, the red bars are Omicron. The green bars are Delta. So you can see the week prior to 47, the week 44, which is the week prior, Delta was still fairly dominant in our province. But starting from week 45, 46, 47, we're seeing Omicron as the dominant variant.
We are worried about the rapid rise in these numbers, and we want to deal with it as if we are in the 4th wave, whether technically declared or not. That's how we are responding. So we are repurposing the beds, we are preparing the health system, we're going back to the things we have done in the run-up to the peak of the first wave, the second wave, and the third wave, as you know. The third wave was much higher for us.
Nigeria on Wednesday reported its first 3 cases of the Omicron COVID-19 variant in air passenger arrivals, with all 3 cases having travelled from South Africa last week. The announcement did not trigger any shock within the country, as many health experts had stated that it was only a matter of time for Nigeria to be hit by the new variant. According to the Director General of the Nigerian Centre for Disease Control and Prevention, the variant was discovered following routine travel tests required for all international travellers and genome sequencing. The health institution said the tracking of the close contacts of the confirmed cases has begun in a bid to identify all potential infections within the country. At least 99 Palestinian journalists were mistreated by the Israeli army in November, while cases of arrests and physical aggression toward media workers continue to rise. According to the Press and Media Office of the Palestinian government, at least 14 media sector workers were detained by Israeli occupation forces in the past month. In the case of 2 of them, there was also damage done to their homes. According to reports, on several occasions, illegal Jewish settlers, with the support of Israeli forces, prevented Palestinian journalists from covering violent acts carried out against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. Palestinian journalists have emphasized that leaders of the occupying state should be held accountable for violence against Palestinian media workers and be referred to the International Criminal Court. And we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.